If you're just logging in, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar that we're going to be covering a 2026 Virginia Data Center Legislative Update. For those just joining us, my name is Brad Nowak. I'm a partner and chair of the Energy, Environment, and Regulatory section at Williams Mullen. I also co-chair the firm's data center practice. And I'm very pleased to be joined this morning by my colleague, Chris McDonald. Chris is an attorney and lobbyist who serves as Director of Government Relations within the firm's government relations group. He's also a very active member, especially this time of year, in both our energy and data center teams. Chris brings deep experience advocating on key data center legislation and represents clients before the Virginia's legislative and executive branches of government. Our Williams Mullins data center team is comprised of over 20 attorneys and advisors who provide end-to-end legal support across the full data center lifecycle, representing developers, operators, investors in all phases from site selection and permitting through energy procurement, financing, construction, operations, and disposition. Next slide, please. And next slide. Before we begin, just a few quick housekeeping items. At any point during the presentation, you can submit questions using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. We'll get to those at the end of the presentation. If you have any audio or technical problems, you can use that same button and we will assist you. And finally, we will email a copy of today's PowerPoint presentation following the webinar. Next slide, please. Before we dive in, I'll just provide a quick roadmap of today's presentation. We'll start with a high-level overview of the political landscape in this year's General Assembly session. We'll also talk about the importance of data centers in Virginia and walk through then several key data center bills, including ongoing focus on data center retail sales and use tax exemption and related budget considerations, legislation transitioning from a weatherization pilot to broader cost allocation and public interest standards for customers with on-site generation, new measures impacting where and how data centers can be developed, bills addressing water usage, backup generation, accelerated clean energy buyers. There's some pilot projects for undergrounding of transmission lines, efforts to advance reuse of waste heat from data centers, an increased focus on load forecasting within Dominion's integrated resource plan, and finally, legislation affecting substation development within electric cooperative territories. At the end, we'll wrap up with some Q&A. So with that, let me turn the program back over to Chris.
Thanks, Brad. Like I said earlier, very happy to be here. I know we've done a number of legislative updates over the years dealing with renewable energy, and a number of them have kind of danced around the data center industry. So really excited to be here and actually focus on that for the next half hour or so. The top theme of this legislative session, just to kind of lead off, was change. As you can see on this slide, back in November, Democrats swept all three statewide offices. Former Congresswoman Abigail Spanberger was elected governor, former Virginia State Senator Ghazala Hashmi was elected lieutenant governor, and former Virginia delegate Jay Jones was elected attorney general. The House of Delegates also experienced a massive blue wave, with Democrats capturing 13 additional seats to expand their majority from 51 members to 64 members, their largest majority in nearly 40 years. The Senate was not up for election in 2025, so coming into 2026, it remained the same 21-19 Democratic majority that it has been for a few years now. And the change hasn't stopped. In fact, since January, there have already been 8 more special elections for the General Assembly, 6 in the House and 2 in the Senate, to fill vacancies that were created due to legislators joining the Spanberger administration, House members joining the Senate, or in one case, the passing of a longtime member of the House of Delegates. Next slide, please. This year was our 60-day session, which is known as a long session, which I note every year is an extremely relative term, given that our short sessions are just 45 days. Long or short, Virginia legislative sessions move at the speed of light. This year, we saw just over 3,400 bills and resolutions introduced. Of those, just over 1,000 bills passed, while another 1,281 failed, and another 432 were carried over to 2027, meaning they hypothetically could be reintroduced in the same form next January. The General Assembly adjourned on Saturday, March 14th, and will return to Richmond on April 22nd to take up any legislation that Governor Spanberger amends or vetoes. Now, notably, particularly for this audience in this webinar, the House and Senate were not able to find compromise between their competing budget proposals. And as such, they'll have to continue to work over the next month before returning to Richmond for a special session scheduled for April 23rd. At the center of this budget standoff, well, if you're on this call, you probably already know. Ultimately, the House and Senate cannot come to an agreement on the tax treatment of data centers. We'll get more into that in a few moments. Next slide, please. Virginia remains the data center capital of the world. As of last summer, there were nearly 6,500 megawatts of operational data centers and over 2,610 megawatts under construction, and an additional 24,103 megawatts planned. And those figures are just from June. And look, they have a tremendous impact on the Commonwealth. Tens of thousands of jobs, billions added in state GDP, and billions in local revenue. Take Loudoun County, for example. In 2025, data centers were reported as generating $895 million in local revenue. That nearly covered the entirety of Loudoun's operating budget in 2025, which was around $940 million. So we're really talking about unparalleled impact, particularly at the local level. That being said, data centers do require substantial electricity. The Joint Legislative and Audit Review Commission, or JLARC, projects that Virginia's energy needs will double in the next 10 years. So we're going to require a lot more generation as well as new transmission infrastructure to keep up with these demands. There have also been concerns about potential water usage. And you'll see in the slides ahead how energy and water continue to be major influences on lawmakers, particularly in the bills they bring year after year. Next slide, please. I mentioned earlier that the centerpiece of this year's budget battle has been on the tax treatment of data centers. And specifically, this relates to the data center retail sales and use tax exemption. Virginia is one of 36 states that actually have this exemption available to developers. A developer may take advantage of this if they sign an MOU with the Virginia Economic Development Partnership, or VEDP, and commit to $150 million in new capital investment and 50 new jobs. These requirements are slightly lighter in so-called distressed localities, where they must commit to $70 million in new capital investment as well as 10 new jobs. Generally speaking, this exemption covers qualifying computer equipment and enabling software. In the interest of time, I won't list all the potential qualifying items, but if you're curious, there's a long list on VEDP's website that you can check out. Next slide, please. But it is this tax exemption that is the sticking point between the House and Senate with their budget negotiations. Currently, this general exemption is set to sunset on June 30th, 2035. The Senate, via their budget proposal, has proposed not just letting this sunset, but rather speeding up the sunset and ending the exemption outright on January 1st, 2027. The Senate and the patrons see this as a way to generate vast new revenue for the Commonwealth. The House of Delegates, on the other hand, does not agree. They've indicated a desire to maintain the exemption, though they have proposed some new requirements that a data center must adhere to if they wish to take advantage of the exemption going forward. This would involve a prohibition on co-located generation that emits CO2, stringent new clean energy procurement requirements, and new Tier 4 generator requirements. After weeks of negotiations, ultimately the House and Senate were at an impasse by the time March 14th arrived, so they adjourned without a budget agreement. Budget negotiators are continuing to meet and work on new proposals even as we speak. Multiple ideas have been suggested as a way to address this disparity in proposals, including other ways that data centers could potentially be taxed in a way that, one, generates the revenue that the Senate is looking for, but two, doesn't upend the current sales tax exemption and threaten existing or future developments. This includes even a consumption tax that has been mentioned by Governor Spanberger, which would effectively establish a tax rate on electricity and water consumed by a data center. Now, at this juncture, it remains to be seen where the House and Senate, or how the House and Senate will find compromise. The governor, as I mentioned earlier, has called for a special session for April 23rd for a final vote on the budget, offering a hypothetical end date to negotiations. Next slide, please. Sticking with our hottest issues, we've got Senate Bill 253 and House Bill 1393. Now, these bills initially began the General Assembly session as a weatherization pilot program for low-income, elderly, and disabled residents. Close to the halfway point of session, however, Senate Bill 253 was amended to include new provisions that would allow the SEC to determine if new distribution costs and capacity auction costs should be shifted onto data centers and large manufacturers. House Bill 1393 was amended later in session to conform to this new provision. The intent of this, per the patron, Senator Lucas, was to lower residential customers' energy bills by shifting these costs directly to the data centers. The SEC estimates that if these costs were to be shifted to the data centers, residential customers would see their rates reduced by 3.4%, which equates to roughly $5.52 each month. Conversely, data center customers who would be bearing the brunt of these costs would see their rates increased by an estimated 15.8%. This amendment really caught the industry by surprise, given that in late November 2025, the SEC had already approved the creation of a new rate class for data centers, the GS5 rate class, that ostensibly was already there to help insulate residential ratepayers from rising costs and ensuring that data centers pay their fair share. Now, this set of amendments was not the last work we actually saw on this legislation. In fact, late on Saturday afternoon, March 14th, literally hours before the General Assembly adjourned, new amendments appeared, including a provision that would require the SEC to use new cost allocation framework and determine whether rate proposals for customers with on-site generation are in the public interest. This could hypothetically make on-site generation much more, if not prohibitively, expensive for data centers. With these amendments, these bills did pass the House and Senate just before they adjourned. They are currently before the governor and remain both a point of contention for the industry and an ongoing part of budget negotiations. Next slide, please. Siting. For several years now, Delegate Josh Thomas and Senator Danica Roem have introduced bill after bill proposing new requirements for the siting of data centers. And this year, their legislation actually seems poised to go the distance. House Bill 153 and Senate Bill 94 requires that a locality perform a site assessment of a proposed high energy use facility, meaning a facility that requires 100 megawatts of power or more. Such an assessment would require an evaluation of the sound profile the facility would have on nearby residences and schools. And it would also require a study of the effect the facility may have on nearby water resources, ag and forest land, parks, and historic sites. In their final form, these bills have passed both the House and Senate and currently await action from Governor Spanberger. Next slide, please. As mentioned earlier, the potential water use of data centers continues to remain a concern of lawmakers, and as such, we saw a number of bills introduced addressing this. Of the many introduced, it was House Bill 496 and Senate Bill 553 that actually survived the General Assembly process. This legislation requires that a water utility must report on the volume of both potable water and reclaimed water that was provided each month to data centers. For the sake of comparison, this legislation also requires similar reporting for domestic, commercial, and industrial users. This bill has passed both the House and Senate and currently is on Governor Spanberger's desk awaiting action. Next slide, please. Let's shift over to energy use for a moment, and let's talk backup generators. First, we'll start with House Bill 897 from Delegate Rip Sullivan. As introduced, this bill proposed strict new energy and emissions requirements for data centers if they wish to take advantage of the aforementioned sales and use tax exemption. This entailed clean energy procurement requirements, Tier 4 generator requirements, and a prohibition of on-site generation that would emit CO2. Later, through the legislative process, this bill actually even explored an extension of the sales and use tax exemption with these strings attached. Ultimately, however, and after the budget proposals came out, namely with the Senate budget proposal eradicating the sales tax exemption, this bill was killed in Senate finance. But as anyone who works with the Virginia Assembly can tell you, nothing dead is ever really truly dead. So we actually saw the underlying proposals in House Bill 897, generators, clean energy procurement, and bans on on-site CO2 emitting generation, incorporated into the House Budget Bill, HB 30, which is still alive and being negotiated today, as we talked about earlier. So that's one bill dead, one bill in flux, and that leaves us with House Bill 507. This bill came from newly elected delegate John McAuliffe, no relation to the former governor. Beginning July 1, 2027, DEQ would be prohibited from issuing an air permit for a data center unless the data center is equipped with Tier 4 or equivalent backup generators. Now, these are the generators that meet the EPA's most strict requirements for particulate matter and nitrogen oxide emissions and use technology that improve fuel efficiency and reduce CO2 output. House Bill 507 passed clean and currently is before Governor Spanberger awaiting action. Next slide, please. This set of bills also deals with the electricity needs of data centers. Accelerated clean energy buyers here are defined as commercial or industrial customers with an aggregate load of 25 megawatts or more. They used to be referred to in the code as renewable clean energy buyers, or excuse me, as accelerated renewable energy buyers, but this legislation has changed it to accelerated clean energy buyers. This is not merely a change in name. In fact, the major change that this legislation proposes is that these buyers may now contract with their utilities to obtain capacity, energy, or RECs that include qualifying solar, wind, energy storage, or zero carbon resources, which hypothetically includes nuclear or fusion. So in other words, accelerated clean energy buyers could buy and retire zero carbon emissions credits, or ZECs. This bill saw widespread support from the General Assembly, with Senate Bill 598 passing both chambers unanimously and House Bill 396 passing the Senate unanimously and the House with only 4 no votes. These bills are currently awaiting action from Governor Spanberger. Next slide, please. Transmission lines continue to be one of the stickiest issues related to data center policy, causing concern amongst nearby residents and lawmakers, both about their cost and the impact they have on their local communities. This is particularly true in Northern Virginia, particularly in Loudoun County, where Dominion continues to work on what's called a reliability loop that will serve the nearby data centers. Just this week, there was more news about a transmission project there called Golden to Mars and whether the SEC would consider undergrounding it. But make no mistake, it's not just Northern Virginia. Even this morning, there was an article in the Cardinal News about planned transmission project called Valley Link Transmission that would run from Campbell County to Culpeper County and mounting opposition from residents there. Now, while undergrounding transmission lines sounds like a great idea, it comes with immense costs. Even Dominion has reported in feasibility studies that burying these transmission lines is prohibitively expensive. This session, Delegate Singh and Senator Srinivasan introduced legislation that tries to address this. HB 1487 and SB 827 authorized the SEC to approve 4 pilot projects for undergrounding 500 kilovolt transmission lines. Most importantly, however, they established a system for which the cost of this project would be covered. Under this legislation, localities would be required to pay 50% of the marginal costs of undergrounding project, meaning the difference between the projected cost of placing the transmission lines underground, either partly or in full, or above ground. Whatever that cost amounts to, for the locality's 50% share, they can pay for it by allocating their own funds outright, bonding on it, subject to a referendum, or imposing a levy on electric utility customers within the locality. If they elect to impose a levy, there are some guardrails. First, the levy on residential customers can't exceed more than 99 cents per month. Second, the legislation requires that the levy be developed in consultation with the SEC and proposes strict requirements for how that may be calculated. These bills have passed both the House and Senate and currently are before the governor awaiting action. Next slide, please. Waste heat. We've talked a lot today about the power a data center needs, but not actually about the power that it may be generating itself. At least that's the idea behind HB 323 from Delegate Sullivan. This legislation requires Virginia Energy to study waste heat from data centers, literally the thermal energy generated by their server banks, and identify potential opportunities for beneficial uses, particularly nearby. This bill saw unanimous support in the House and Senate and is currently before the governor. Next slide, please. While there were a number of bills introduced dealing with Dominion's Integrated Resource Plan, or IRP process, I did want to briefly mention this one, as it really does try to get more at load forecasting, largely in response to data center needs. HB 892 from Delegate Irene Shin requires Dominion to provide information related to forecasting compliance with their Virginia Clean Economy Act standards in their IRP. This shall include a required, or this shall not include, excuse me, a required reporting of compliance assessment or requirements associated with accelerated renewable energy buyers. It's a mouthful. Additionally, and most interestingly, it does direct the SEC to initiate a proceeding by March 1, 2027, to investigate electric load forecasting practices by Dominion, Appalachian Power, and the electric co-ops. In conducting this proceeding, the SEC is directed to review the materials, data sets, and filings provided to PJM, evaluate the accuracy, consistency, and transparency of load forecasting methods, and determine whether such utilities and the electric co-ops are incorporating risk minimization terms into their load forecasts, including financial commitments, minimum demand obligations, and other terms that may be included. This bill passed both the House and Senate and awaits governor's action as well. Next slide, please. All right, our final slide of the morning. House Bill 1191 and Senate Bill 377. This legislation deals with substation construction and should have a fairly immediate beneficial impact for the data center industry. This legislation authorizes electric co-ops to enter into an agreement with a co-op member, such as a data center, to construct a substation that connects to transmission lines and later allows the cooperative to take ownership and operate it. Notably, it disallows the passing along of any of these costs to customers: construction costs, operation costs, maintenance costs. All of these costs are to be paid by the large customer. This legislation also passed both the House and Senate and currently is before Governor Spanberger. Brad, I think that brings it to the end of my list today. Happy to entertain some questions if there are some.
Sure. Yeah, we've got several questions here on our data center segment. So first question relates to what happens if a budget is not agreed to by April 23rd or at all? Is that a possibility?
It's a good question. And frankly, this could drag out longer. The biennial budget for the Commonwealth is supposed to kick in at the beginning of Virginia's fiscal year, so July 1, 2026. So hypothetically, if negotiations continue to stall out, they still do have time to continue to work on this before there would really be a concrete impact on the Commonwealth. Now, I think there's a desire from all participants, House, Senate, Governor's office, and industry, to not drag this out any longer than it needs to be. From what I've been told and what I've heard, they are working diligently to try to get to this April 23rd deadline. I will note we will actually learn if there's a budget compromise a few days in advance of this April 23rd special session, as constitutionally the budget must be available for reading and review by the legislature for 48 hours before a final vote is taken on it. So we'll learn a little bit more in a couple weeks as we enter the midpoint of April, but it is possible that it could drag on a little bit longer.
It looks like there's a question relating to SB 30 and HB 30. How does the updated data center retail sales and use tax exemption framework in the budget bill affect eligibility thresholds or compliance obligations for data center operators?
It's a good question. So House Bill 30, as we've talked about a couple of times now, effectively proposes additional strings that would be attached to the data center retail sales and use tax exemption. And that's your Tier 4 generator requirements, your renewable energy procurement targets, as well as that prohibition on on-site CO2 emitting generation. They propose that you must adhere to those categories or those provisions in order to qualify for that. Senate Bill 30, just frankly, for lack of better words, would obliterate the exemption. So there would really be no strings or no compliance framework because there'd be nothing to comply in service to.
Okay, similar question like last session, just about legislation effective. If the governor signs a bill or takes no action, when does legislation take effect in Virginia?
Right. So once a bill hits the governor's desk, she can decide to sign it as is, offer amendments, or veto it. She offers amendments, it must go back to the General Assembly, and that's where on April 22nd, they will vote by simple majority votes either to confirm or deny the amendments that were offered. If she vetoes it, the governor or the General Assembly may override that by a supermajority vote. So very, very tough threshold. If the governor does not act on a bill at all, if she doesn't sign it and just leaves it effectively sitting on her desk, by the end of her action window, which is 11:59 p.m. on April 13th, the bill is actually deemed signed into law anyways. So whatever that effective date of the bill would be, mostly that's July 1, 2026, that bill would be deemed signed and then go into effect on July 1.
Okay, let's just take one more question with our time here. Has the governor indicated whether she intends to veto any data legislation or propose amendments?
It's a good question. There have been no inclinations or indications, I should say, of outright vetoes on these bills. Um, so I wouldn't necessarily expect vetoes, but I do think the real question is what is going to be amended and how many amendments will there be offered? Now, obviously, the budget bills, HB 30 and SB 30, they will get the brunt of the amendments. That happens every year, whether or not data centers are involved in it. Governor always does some refining before sending it back. And then Senate Bill 253 and House Bill 1393. Those are the bills that were amended to effectively become cost recovery bills for Dominion for certain data center related costs. That's kind of the big question too. That's a part of the ongoing negotiations over the budget and tax status of data centers. So I wouldn't necessarily expect vetoes, but I think amendments are more likely than not coming down the pipe on these bills.
Well, great. Well, it looks like we're right at time. So if you ask a question, and we've got several that we did not get to today, but we'll follow up by email. And if you have any other questions, feel free to email Chris or me, or if you want to sign up for our mailing list, feel free to email us at datacenters@williamsmullen.com. Thank you again for attending today's presentation, and hope everybody has a great day.